समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
When the annihilation of the class enemy had been completed with axes and machetes, Nirmala Krishnamurti dipped her hands in his blood, then tore the Mangal Sutra of the victim's wife from her neck. As the police made me a widow, she proclaimed, so have you become one. Earlier that summer, the Maoists of Srikakulam had begun assassinating local landlords and moneylenders, the first steps they imagined on the long road to revolution. Local squad leader Panchadi Krishnamurti had been betrayed and killed in a police encounter. 400 Adivasis then marched on the village of Akkupalli to deliver vengeance. 14 years old that summer, Nambala Kesava Rao almost certainly knew of the tide of blood washing over Srikakulam. G.N.Pet, where his father Vasudeva Rao worked as a school teacher, is just a short distance from Akkupalli. The General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, Maoist, killed this week, was not given to discuss his childhood memories, so we don't know. Like the murder of a ghost, the killing or capture of elderly insurgents has a somewhat strange quality to it. Think of the capture of Shining Path's Abimael Guzman, the self-proclaimed fourth shoulder of Marxism at 54, the arrest of Red Army faction terrorist Daniela Klette at 65, the killing of Osama bin Laden at 57. The causes they killed for and their crimes all belong for the most part to memory. Their stories had ended in irrelevance long before the end. The strange thing about Kesava Rao, who you may also have heard of as Basavaraju, who was killed at 70, was that his cause died even before he embraced it. Even though Prime Minister Manmohan Singh famously declared Maoism the greatest internal security threat to our country, it was evident to anyone who was watching carefully that by the 1980s, neither the ideology nor its practitioners had any influence outside the Adivasi enclaves of central India. To the working class and peasantry, the People's War was utterly irrelevant. For most Indians, the years after independence were a time of great hope. For Indian communists, though, they provided a painful education. Their hopes of a revolution turned out to be illusory. In the 1957 election, the communists were decimated even in their strongholds in Telangana, the site of the great peasant rebellion of 1948-1951. The writer and editor Ramesh Thapar dryly observed, ostensibly conditions all over the country seem ripe for revolutionary change, but the parties who declare their adherence to Marxism and Leninism seem struck by an incapacity to evaluate the situation, let alone lead it. The Communist Party predictably splintered under this stress. The Communist Party of India, or CPI, accepted constitutionalism and began supporting some Congress Party policies. The new breakaway Communist Party of India Marxist, or CPIM, embraced continued political struggle. Then the 1967 rebellion by tea workers in Bengal's Naxalbari fractured the CPM from within, with many of its radicals calling for the party to adopt armed struggle. Large parts of the CPIM leadership in Andhra Pradesh, scholar Shanta Sinha has noted, had drifted towards the Maoist position by 1968. For this generation of Maoists, the struggle that evolved in Srikakulam became the site where all these debates were played out in practice. The colonial period scholar Shivaji Mukherjee writes had seen Adivasi lands handed over to a new class of zamindars, who in turn raised rents through tax farmers or subcontractors. Liquor sellers, money lenders, and merchants followed in the undertow of this new money-based economy. Government schemes meant to end the exploitation of the Adivasis achieved little. In one case, Sinha records, an irrigation project built to benefit Adivasis in 1963-1964 actually provided 3/4 of its waters to a single non-tribal landlord. Local cooperatives set up in Adivasi areas stocked soap and cosmetics, not salt, grain or kerosene the poor needed. Elsewhere in India, political competition had provided some redress, however ineffectual and limited, to other exploited communities. The Adivasis of Srikakulam, though, existed on the fringes of the new nation state's reach and well beyond its imagination. From 1957-1958, the Adivasis began to encounter a new kind of visitor. Led by Palle Ramulu, the one-time schoolmaster at the village of Kudapalli, groups of left-wing activists, together known as Sanghams, began travelling the region demanding that Adivasi men cut their hair short and that the women cover up their breasts. The alarm would go out even as a Sangham worker approached the village, and all the women would disappear to dress, Sinha records, and once he left, they would discard the dress. Adivasi moral rectification was to remain a leitmotif of the Maoist movement. The anthropologist Alpa Shah much later described how members of the Marxist Coordination Committee in Jharkhand, the local Maoist group, demolished Adivasi liquor brewing stills central to their rituals and culture. The men started kicking over and hitting the aluminium and clay pots, shouting, "Stop drinking and selling alcohol, long live the MCC," Alpa Shah records. This moral crusade might seem a little funny, but it did have real impacts. Tribal literacy was spread by the Maoists through night schools. Adivasis began to assert their rights to land and resources as well as to grain. From 1960, strikes by Adivasi farm workers also became more common. Adivasis, battered by decades of failed colonial era rebellions, were again beginning to develop the courage and a language with which to confront their oppressors. The pressures told, though. Large numbers of Sangham activists began to face police cases, and incidents of police firing on protesters began to erupt. Late in 1968, 400 Adivasis armed with ancient muzzle-loading guns as well as bows and arrows attacked Tigala Narasimhalu, the largest and most hated moneylender of the village of Pedagothili. This first attack was followed by another series of raids. In some cases, the Maoists seized cash and destroyed records of debt owed by Adivasis to local moneylenders. The fighting grew increasingly brutal through 1969. The landlord Balleda Krishnamurthy and his brother were, for example, executed in broad daylight, watched by an audience of hundreds. The head of Pratap Chandra Padi, the president of a Deva Bandhupuram Panchayat, was paraded around adjoining villages. These kinds of killings would become increasingly common. From the summer of 1969, though, the terror began to splutter and then fizzle out. For one, the state responded politically to Adivasi grievances, with then State Home Minister J. Vengala Rao initiating a program of large-scale food aid and small loans. At the same time, the Central Reserve Police Force began to steadily build up its numbers across Srikakulam. Top Maoists were arrested or killed, and large numbers of Sangham cadre were eliminated. The Maoists were forced to retreat into an ever smaller area in the jungles. In 1970, the leader of the Srikakulam Maoists, V. Mallikar Jodalu, had fantasized, and I quote, "We can seize arms on a large scale and soon form the People's Army. In a short time, we will be in a position to march on Bengal." He was killed by the CRPF in an encounter on the Ramrai Hills just a few weeks after he wrote those words. Kesava Rao left his village after the 10th grade to study at the high school in nearby Tekkali, soon after the decimation of the Srikakulam uprising. From the sparse accounts of his childhood friends, there's little to suggest the teenager was involved in local radical circles. Kesava Rao used to play kabaddi a lot, one told a local newspaper. He was fond of agriculture too. After coming home from school, we used to fetch water from an agricultural well and then walk from Jianpet to the Kottabommali Cinema Hall. Later, while studying for an engineering degree in Warangal, Kesava Rao joined the Radical Students' Union, a Maoist-linked body that had emerged in 1974. In 1980, he went underground, accused of having murdered an Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad leader. Later, it emerged that he had joined the People's War Group, the Maoist faction founded by Kondapalli Sitaramaiah in 1980. In 1982, though, the PWG found itself in the improbable position of being an ally of the establishment. Telugu Desam Party leader and Chief Minister N.T. Ramarao now described Maoists as, quote, true patriots who have been misunderstood by the ruling class. This alliance was intended to crush and marginalize the Congress. The PWG aided the TDP campaign in the next year's assembly elections. The long period of peace between the PWG and the Andhra Pradesh government, Ajay Sani has noted, enabled the Maoist movement to rebuild and reconstruct itself after the decisive defeat of 1970. For years, under the benign gaze of the state government, the Maoists gained revenues by extorting funds from tendu patta harvesters, the leaves used to wrap bidi cigarettes, as well as mine owners and government contractors. These practices became deeply entrenched, stretching far beyond Andhra Pradesh into Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra and Odisha. Local politicians may have hoped, I don't know, that allowing the Maoists to become corrupt would corrupt the movement and lead it to dissolve. Late in 2003, though, the truce between the government and the Maoists broke down. Kesava Rao led an attempt by the People's War Group to assassinate then Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu. The Andhra Pradesh government responded ferociously, forcing the Maoists eventually to retreat into the forests of Bastar in Chhattisgarh. Kesava Rao is believed to have organized several brutal attacks on security forces in its new Bastar jungle heartlands, killing 36 police at Balimela in 2008 and 76 more at Chintalnar in 2010. The beheading of suspected police informers and public executions again became commonplace. In 2001, local journalists and officials in Chhattisgarh's Sarguja were invited to watch as 3 defectors from the Maoist ranks were shot by a firing squad in front of a large audience. Like in 1969 though, terror didn't work. Adivasis supported Maoists sometimes for tactical gains or to avenge state violence or to keep the hated government's bureaucrats and police out of their villages. But they had little interest in the project of making a revolution. The state slowly, clumsily, sometimes brutally also built up its capacities to crush the insurgency in Bastar, just as it had done in the past in Srikakulam. Kesava Rao's story teaches us ultimately about how much pointless suffering can be unleashed by toxic ideas untethered to the real world. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.